Hey everyone, I'm Luke.
And I'm Max.
Welcome back to the Upside Down Thoughts NASCAR podcast. And we are back with Zach in the house from Michigan.
How's it going, everybody?
So we're here with the Firekeepers Casino 400 from one of my favorite tracks in Michigan, a 2-mile. I'm going to call it a super speedway with how fast they go here. We're going to get right into it with qualifying. We got Chase Briscoe going back-to-back poles. And as soon as I heard that he got the qualifying on pole, I was like, come on, you got to win this race. But Kyle Busch just behind him in second, and Denny Hamlin in third. Another great qualifying effort from that JGR 11 as we move closer into the playoffs.
Yeah, Chase Briscoe, I'm getting Ryan Newman vibes with all these polls. Third one in a row. Kyle Busch has a great starting position there in second, best of the year. Kyle Larson back in the game, might have hit that mental reset, starting fifth. So it's a great start for him. Chris Buescher in sixth, Barry seventh. Ty Gibbs has got a good starting spot in eighth. Bubba Wallace qualifying good again in ninth. And Zane Smith, a great qualifying effort rounding out the top 10.
Yeah, moving along. We got, Cindric, Blaney, the two Penske guys, Blaney in 13th, coming off of a big win in Nashville for him. We talked about it a little bit, but we got Alex Bowman in the 16th spot, Chase Elliott 17th, still searching for that first win. Ty Dillon, AJ Allmendinger, and then Ross Chastain rounding out the top 20.
And a great effort for the two guys qualifying inside the top 20 in Ty Dillon and AJ Allmendinger. But just behind them, the two Legacy Motor Club guys going 21st and 22nd. So pretty up to par with there. And qualifying 23rd just behind him, Ryan Preece, who was my pick to win, as I mentioned last week. And we got Christopher Bell in 25th, a bit of a poor qualifying effort for him. You usually see him up in the top 10 for most races, but this is one of his worst tracks that he goes to on the schedule. So nothing too crazy from him.
Yeah, all the drivers basically in qualifying, well, most of your 4 or 5-star engines were hitting that 200 miles per hour down the front straightaway. But Christopher Bell, I noticed he topped out at 198, which was relatively slow compared to the rest of the field. He was kind of down there ranked with the Rick Ware Racing speed. And it kind of made you wonder if there might have been a problem or something limited with the engine that just wasn't allowing it to, access the full potential of it. But just not a whole lot of speed out of that car in qualifying. And moving down the starting grid a little further, we see Brad Keselowski in 27th, another poor qualifying effort. After the good starting spot at Nashville last week, couldn't put the finish together. Here he is starting in the back again, and it'll be interesting to see if he's able to move forward. And then we got our headline driver, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in 30th. We mentioned in the Nashville podcast that he won't end up doing anything in this race, as him and Hocevar won't be getting together, but it'll be a good race for him to see if he can rebound, clear his head a little bit after last week, after getting cleaned out after about 100 laps.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it we got for qualifying. We're going to jump right into this race at Michigan, a packed grandstand. We got Chase Briscoe and Kyle Busch leading us to green as Briscoe is on the outside lane. And he would clear quickly Kyle Busch into turn one. But you see, William Byron and Denny Hamlin, the guys we've been mentioning them, it feels like every week doing this podcast, and they would be making their way up to that top 5. And, we see Tyler Reddick, who started at the rear of the field. He's already up to 19th position. So on these restarts, you can really see the guys using all the track to get as many positions as they can, as we see with Tyler Reddick here, advancing, almost 20 positions.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a great start, to the race for them. And moving a little further, we're going to end up seeing Daniel Suarez pit from 28th with a vibration. I don't see anything crazy here. It kind of looked like it might have just been a problem with the tire, possibly a tire rub, but it could have been with contact that wasn't exactly caught. I didn't see anything. I don't know if anyone else kind of caught anything on that. It's just been a rough season for Daniel Suarez. We really haven't heard his name at all. We finally talked about his teammate Chastain at Charlotte, and Trackhouse really hasn't been talked about much so far this year. So, it's not looking like Suarez is going to be able to bring it together quite yet, but you really hope for the best for him moving forward. Next week being Mexico City, his home track for the first time that NASCAR is ever going there. So you would think hopefully he'll have a good shot next week and he can start trending back up in the right direction.
Yeah, and from the in-car camera watching the race highlights back, because I didn't get to quite catch stage one for this race. It kind of looked like the steering wheel was, vibrating back and forth in his hand. So it kind of looked like a drivetrain issue, if I had to state an opinion. But I like what you mentioned with Mexico City, his home country, his home track. As we know, he gets a good finish, so he wins the Xfinity race. So it's kind of a mental reset going into these last 7, 8 races here. But I mean, it's just out of his control, as I believe it was a drivetrain issue for Suarez.
Yeah, but, moving on, we see Buescher take the lead. He's going to manage to pass William Byron with about 9 to go in the stage. It's going to bring us to the end of stage 1 already, as it's a fairly short stage, being a big track. We're going to see it be Buescher, Byron, Hamlin, Briscoe, and Josh Berry sneaking into top 5 right at the end of the stage. So great first stage from that 21 Wood Brothers team.
Yeah, Luke, you kind of mentioned it earlier with Briscoe, but man, you think 3 poles in a row, he would, have something. That car is fast in qualifying, but just can't seem to hang on. Earlier in I think it was lap 5 or 6, Byron already passed him for that leading spot. And then, Chris Buescher in the 17 car had such a fast car all day. You could see that in stage 1 when he passed Byron for the lead. He kind of held on, for a while and got the huge stage 1 win, which he needed, especially after that, points deduction that he had in Kansas. So, great stage for him, but, it's kind of tough to see for Briscoe. You feel for a guy like that, 3 poles in a row. And, the car just doesn't seem that fast when you actually get out there on the track.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the car being not that fast. So you also got to look at who's behind him. Arguably the best driver this year, William Byron, in that Hendrick car. So, that's difficult competition to go up at a track like Michigan. You mentioned the speed not quite being there. I do agree. He was lacking a little bit of speed transfer from qualifying to the race. But you got to give William Byron some credit there. He drove the hell out of that race car.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think you two made great points there, talking about pretty much everyone in our top 5, it felt like. But moving on from there, we're into stage 2. And we're going to see everyone pit with Ryan Blaney getting off with the lead, followed by the 11 of Hamlin and the 77 of Hocevar, who back at his home track, being Michigan, has already found himself into the top 3. So he's having a great run, starting outside the top 10. And right before we go back to green, we're going to see Cindric come back into the pits to tighten some right side tires. I see nothing there. It's just making sure you don't have to take a crew chief vacation and a pit crew vacation, because you certainly don't want that heading into the home stretch of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And, just moving on into the restart, we'd see Ryan Blaney, who takes the lead, clearing Denny Hamlin in turns 1 and 2. And now we kind of see this Hocevar Hamlin battle like we had last week at Nashville. So, kind of stating the same names over and over again. That's kind of going to be a theme as we're getting closer to the playoffs. The top guys are really going to start seeing their faces in the top 10, and guys like Hocevar, who's outside the playoff bubble right now, they're going to really start saying, hey, it's game time. We got to go. We got to get as many points as we can, or we're going to have to win our way into the playoffs. So just look out for these names as we keep mentioning them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to bring us to the stage 2 restart, eventually with Blaney and Hamlin leading us to green. And Hocevar is going to go right for second, as he's going to be attacking Hamlin right exiting turn 2. And he's going to manage to get the spot around lap 58, but no later does he get the spot move up to second. Hamlin starts falling. We see Nemechek and Gragson spin off a turn 2. They didn't get together, but it looked like they were kind of spinning in sync. I believe Nemechek might have been checking up as a result of Gragson spinning. I wasn't able to get a ton of context on this wreck. I know, Luke, you were able to get a little more, I believe, but just looked like it was an arrow spin by Gragson off a turn 2 and nothing super crazy.
Yeah, what I saw was, kind of with how bumpy Michigan is, it kind of looked like Nemechek was in that second groove, caught that lip a little bit where there's not really a crack, but there's, a fill in on the track, and it just kind of shook his car to the right, tried to recorrect to the left. He spun, and Gragson's 2 inches from his bumper. There's not much he can do other than, hit the brakes, and that would spin his car right out. So, nothing Gragson do, and nothing really that Nemechek could do. It's not really anyone's fault. It's just kind of how Michigan is running that second groove. So that's why you see a lot of guys running the bottom or some guys running the top when they have older tires. the middle groove is kind of a no man's land at Michigan.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of moving along after that. So after the caution, we have Elliott leading, which is big for him. Like we kind of mentioned before, him still trying to look for his first win of the year. We also, so Willie B, like you talked about, Luke, Briscoe leading, but Willie B, such a good driver, always has a fast car. So he's in the lead with laps led at 22 right now, 23 at the point with lap 66.
Yeah, and it's great to keep mentioning William Byron, who was just driving the wheels off that thing, passing Blaney for second. But as soon as we get this restart started, we'd see a scary wreck. Involving Bowman is the one I want to touch on most. But it's just a bunch of cars and a lot of checking up and bumping, and we'd see Bowman get right rear hooked and going this fast, going right into that outside wall. Ooh, this was a scary one to watch, watching at home. And, thankfully it was okay. I'm going to keep saying this, this stock car is the safest race car ever made. He got out just fine. You mentioned he had a little bit of a pain in his back and a headache, but, he was cleared from the infield care center and man, glad he's okay, but a scary, scary wreck.
Yeah, for sure. This is, I think, one of the scariest crashes we've seen so far this year, and that goes without saying that even at tracks where you think, oh, well, all the bad crashes, they're kind of come at your Daytona, your Talladega, Atlanta, your high-speed, big pack racing tracks. Well, a lot of people forget how fast Michigan really is, especially in the corners. They're pushing 185, 180, 185 through the corners. So to see this car go head on into the wall after getting tagged is really scary, as you can see in a replay that Bowman's car, especially in slow motion, that the rear tires of this race car were completely off the ground, which really goes to show you how hard this hit really was. And it's really good to see that Alex Bowman got out with a little assistance, but mostly under his own power. And he will end up being in the car at Mexico City, which is great to see as well. And goes to prove your point further correct, Luke, saying that it's one of the safest stock cars that we've ever seen. As this car had a lot of problems when it first came out, with a lot of safety problems. We were seeing concussions. Eric Jones had his accident at Talladega where he had a back injury for a few weeks. So to see the improvements that they're making with this car, it's just phenomenal to see the progress they're making with it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just that, Bowman's okay. He was able to walk out under his own power. So that was good to see. Definitely watching that live, it was a really scary wreck. He hit the wall so hard and the car almost got a little airborne when he hit. But the awesome thing that I kind of took from it is, we talked about it in the last podcast for Charlotte. And there's like questions people are asking, is Bowman going to stay in that 48 car for Hendricks? But, kind of as we are in the future a little bit, we saw that Bowman raced in Mexico City, but there were reports a couple of days earlier that he could barely even walk. So just, the fact that he was able to, tough out this crash, be like, no, I'm racing. I want to prove why I should stick in this 48 car, why I should be racing for Hendricks next year. I think it really just goes to show the type of person that Alex Bowman is and the driver that he is.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And, he may not be getting the best equipment at Hendrick, but, he's a guy that knows what he has to do. I think he's right inside or just outside that playoff bubble right now. So, I mean, it's probably going to take a win for him to get in with they're at Daytona, there can be a winner or a weird winner, but, he's becoming a super good road course racer. You see him win at Chicago Street Course last year, which is coming up on the schedule. You see him get great runs at Sonoma and Watkins Glen. So I think it's super important that he ran this Mexico City race. And I'm just glad to see him, get out of the car, A-okay. And, Max mentioned like there's been a lot of changes with this car. I think if this was 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think he's walking out under his own will. And, I don't think he would be able to, to get back in the car as quickly as he did. So just super good stuff from NASCAR here.
For sure. The two biggest things to take away from this wreck, that Bowman, it's great. He was okay, and second overall, the car is improving drastically, which NASCAR and this is coming from someone, that has attacked NASCAR in the past, like for these things. Well, they get a lot of hate for saying their car is not safe enough. Their car is too safe. The car doesn't crumble when it takes damage. Well, whatever they're doing is clearly working, because a hit like this, a driver, it's kind of terrible to say, but a driver should not be walking away. As we saw Connor Zilisch have his hit at Talladega, very similar hit. That was in an Xfinity car, and he was out of the car for 3 weeks. So, and that was at a very similar speed. So it really goes to show you that NASCAR deserves a lot more credit than they're getting for all the adjustments and advancements they've made with this car.
Yeah, for sure. Great points we all made there. But getting back into the racing, during that crash, we would see the red flag come out. So that just goes to show you how serious this wreck was. But Chase Elliott would lead us with Christopher Bell on his inside, and with Brad Keselowski just behind them. So, an interesting kind of top three to restart is with us. Bell, qualified in the mid-20s, and Keselowski really didn't mention in qualifying. So, let's see what they got as we're coming to the end of the stage.
Yeah, but no later are we approaching the end of the stage. We see Nemechek spin from 33rd and 3 and 4. He's going to back into the wall. I don't see a ton of damage here. He's going to be able to drive away. And this is already his second spin of the day. So to see him to be able to still be wheeling this car after 2 spins is, it's great to see. And it kind of goes to show you that Legacy Motor Club, they're willing to persevere, even though they might not be getting the finishes they want, but they are reaching for the stars, and they want better finishes.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I don't have a whole lot to say on this wreck. I think it's just kind of one of those simple self spins we see at Michigan with this next gen car. You really didn't see it too much with the Gen 6, but with it only being like 2 grooves you can run, like I mentioned, the top and the high side, Nemechek was kind of trying to run that middle, and it's very easy to spin yourself out and bring out the caution like we see here.
Yeah, and continuing to move on, we're going to see it get back to some more pit stops here after the spin. And I wanted to mention this. We're going to see Chase Elliott get penalized for improper fueling. And when I saw this penalty, I was quite confused, because it's a penalty on pit road that you don't see quite often. I don't know if either of you exactly saw what the reasoning for this penalty was, or if we had any more information on this. I'm kind of just curious, as an Elliott fan, what was this penalty for, or was NASCAR just penalizing here because they saw something that looked awkward, or I don't know.
Yeah, I was kind of seeing this in the highlights, and I kind of looked it up after the race because I've never heard of this penalty before, and I didn't get to see what his crew is doing. I think it could be 2 things. Either they had too many crew members over the wall helping the crew member fuel, or they put too much. They went over the limit of how much fuel you can put in the car, which is 2 cans. They could have put 2.5 or 2 1/4. So that's really all I can assume for this penalty. I know we always say 4 tires and 2 cans of fuel is the maximum you can do. Well, the car can hold more than that in the extra fuel tanks that they have in the car. So you're only allowed to maximum 2 cans in the car. So you could have went over that. I'm not really sure. These are just kind of my speculations, as I didn't get to see quite what happened with this penalty.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that second point of playing over the 2 cans, and because that's super valid, and that completely went over my head, because now I'm also glad you mentioned kind of briefly that it's not just the fuel tank in a NASCAR. They actually have 2 extra smaller fuel cells that can usually hold anywhere from about 5 to 8 laps, depending on what track you're at, how long the track is. And drivers actually have something called a fuel switch. They have 2 of them where you can switch those on when you realize that your main tank is running on fumes. Kind of gives you a few extra laps, but they are basically run by a pump that goes up and down inside of those smaller fuel cells. So you're not guaranteed to get all of those laps out of it, which is why you quite often seeing drivers, kind of wiggling their car back and forth when they think they might be out of fuel, trying to get anything that they might be able to get out of that car before it runs out of fuel. But yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, as I said it already, but that kind of went right over my head the first time.
Yeah, and a great way to explain what the fuel cells are. I didn't really do a whole good job of explaining it, but that's perfect. But on the restart, William Byron would get the lead with Christopher Bell and Michael McDowell with them off this restart. And we'd see a bunch of fluctuating positions with Tyler Reddick getting involved in second, and Bell falling to third, and McDowell, going back and forth here. But we see, Todd Gilliland, Logano, and Hamlin. He's still up here, and they would all battle for fifth. So really getting close to the end of this stage, we see a lot of guys fighting for as many stage points as they can get. Like I'm going to mention over these next podcasts, it might not seem like we're getting to the playoffs, but we're getting close. So every single point matters for these guys outside the bubble.
Yeah, and you mentioned a name here that we have not talked about, I feel like, at all this season, and it's Todd Gilliland. He's having a great run, top 5, and to see that team having that run, that is absolutely what they've needed. And because the main reason that we haven't been talking about them, it's not that they've been wrecking, but it's been that they've just been struggling and they've been coasting in the back of the pack. So to see them turn this, basically flip this switch, it's really great for them to see, as that has kind of been a struggling car, as we see Zane Smith qualify inside the top 10, and that being one of the other front row cars, along with Noah Gragson, who was kind of back in traffic as well with Gilliland. But this is a big run here for Front Row Motorsports.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Zach, but if you
do. I just wanted to point out, too, Ryan Preece, really good run for him so far. For him, that RFK team, him, Buescher, Keselowski, really good just to see him have a couple good runs here, especially for someone, I think he's right outside the playoffs right now, maybe that first one out. So, having him get a couple good runs over the next couple of races are going to be huge for him for the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a great point to mention as we didn't cover that. But William Byron would extend his lead to almost a second over Chris Bell. And here's where things get a little interesting. We see Ryan Blaney, he spins his car coming to pit road in 12th, and he would bring out the caution flag. And this is really interesting to me, as I wasn't watching this live at the time. It kind of looked like almost his tire went down and he hit the outside wall. I don't know if you guys have any more information on this, but, trying to get to pit road, it kind of looks like he just lost it and slammed the outside wall and spun down, bringing out the caution here.
Yeah, you mentioned he spins here coming to pit road. Well, I don't think that's the exact perfectly written context, as I do see that in our notes here, but I think more of a perfect context would be here is exactly what you also said. Looked like he blew a tire in 3 and 4 and was kind of spinning towards the infield out at turn 4. I don't know if he was trying to get to pit road. I think that might have been more of just kind of a blessing in disguise. They just happened to spin onto pit road with that down tire. So it will bring the caution out, though, and unfortunately he will not get the lap back, as he is the reason for the caution. I also want to mention that if you would be the first car lap down, if you are involved in the crash or the reasoning for the crash, you don't get the free pass. So this kind of sucks for Blaney, but I think the summary of that accident is that it's a blown tire going into a spin when exiting the corner.
Yeah, and I think that kind of just goes to show how crucial that win in Nashville was last week for Blaney and the 12 team. I think with how close this playoff race is going to be as we come to these last back half of the season, it just seems like, throughout the last couple of races, it's just kind of a series of unfortunate events for Blaney. Things kind of just out of his control that he can't really help, but just goes to show why, it's so necessary for these drivers who, are on the cusp of making the playoffs, that, it's honestly safer. They kind of just need to get a win here.
Yeah, and you mentioned Nashville, but I want to bring up another point that we haven't mentioned at all this season, and take a little bit of break in the podcast. Well, NASCAR implemented a new thing called, the in-season challenge, and if you don't know what that is, Denny Hamlin brought this up to the table, and it's basically, I think, a 5-race tournament where there's 2 drivers that go up against you. It's kind of like a March Madness for NASCAR, but there's 3 seeding races for those 5 races. It starts with Michigan, we have Mexico City, and we have Pocono. So yeah, he won in Nashville and he has locked in, but this this seeding races are huge to get the easiest, don't want to say the easiest, but an easier matchup, to try to win this $1 million, which the in-season challenge is for. So just wanted to mention that there is still something to fight for in this season if you do not make the playoffs for these guys that are way outside the bubble.
Or even for the guys that have won multiple races,
Yeah,
there is still something to race for. So I'm really glad you did bring that up, but I'll let one of you take it from here, moving on after the Ryan Blaney caution.
I'll use that.
So kind of coming off the restart, we have Cindric leading the race, coming to the outside from Briscoe. So Briscoe finds his way back up and then running in the top two. And then we have Austin Dillon up there. Then, there he is, the 24 driver, William Byron. We have him surging the inside, challenging Cindric for the lead. But Tyler Reddick pushes Cindric down the backstretch, and then Reddick drives under. We just see persistence from the 24 team. We've seen it all year. We've seen how fast he can be. And it just seems like he finds himself always running in that top 5 every single race.
Yeah, for sure. I'll let Luke know. I know. So it looked like you were going to make a point, so I'll let you go first.
No, I just wanted to mention Carson Hocevar up here again, getting another top 5 stage finish. So I feel, we say his name like 10 times every podcast, but he's doing such a good job just consistently getting these points in these races and fighting for a playoff spot. It's just very, very cool to watch, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's super crucial as he hasn't won yet. So it's not even that, he's running well, he's a rookie running well or whatever, whatever the conversation is. It's that this guy isn't just a rookie running well. Might be a crazy statement, or you could call me crazy, but with how he's been running, you could be looking at a championship contender. He's up here running with Byron, Hamlin, Logano, Blaney, Elliott, these big names, Larson. And he's making passes and not making it look super hard to pass these guys either.
Yeah, and it's not just that one style of track. It's not just at 1.5s or it's not just at short tracks. It's at road courses. It's at with Nashville, which is like a 1.3 mile track. It's at super speedways. It's at the 1.5 mile ovals. It's at Michigan, a 2 mile track. So he's consistently running well in every single style of track that we see here. So some people might say crazy for a championship contender, but I mean, I don't see it crazy at all.
Yeah, and you kind of feel like this race right here is, the perfect scenario for him to go win his first race. Coming home, the Michigan kid, his first year, he's outside the top 20 in points. So, realistically, for him to make the playoffs, he's going to have to win one of these final races here in the back half of the season.
Yeah, for sure. But mentioning Hocevar does bring us to the end of stage 2, where we see a Byron stage win, followed by Cindric, who is able to keep his track position, Hocevar, who we've been talking about, and Reddick and Chastain. So it's a good stage finish there for Chastain. He has his win at the 600, which was huge 2 weeks ago, and to see him running well again, and one of the Trackhouse cars at least running well is huge. And hopefully it gives Suarez and that 99 team some motivation, maybe some expectations to reach going into Suarez's home track next week.
Yeah, and you mentioned Trackhouse. Well, during these caution break pit stops, we see SVG. Unfortunately, his team would leave that wedge wrench in the back window, so that would take all of his track position away for this race, unfortunately. If you don't know what a wedge wrench is, it's a little yellow looking wrench, and it goes in the back window, and it either raises or lowers that wedge to tighten or loosen up the car. So pit crew just left it in. So, he is running almost in the top 20. So unfortunately that would ruin his track position. But, same with Ricky Stenhouse, who had to come back down pit road to top off on fuel as it didn't get much in the race car. But I'll let one of you guys kick it off for stage 3 here.
Go ahead, Zach.
Starting off with stage 3, we got Willie B up in front again, with Hocevar challenging him. Like we said, Michigan kid, homeboy kid, feel like you need to win a race. He's got the perfect shot here to kind of go challenge Willie B, having the 1 and 2 spot. And then, like that I talked about before, we have Ryan Preece in that 4 spot, RFK driver, guy who, again, like Hocevar, he needs that win to make the playoffs. So we have those guys running up front to start.
Yeah, for sure. It's huge for the guys you mentioned to be up here with this track position as we go into the final stage. But, just as quickly as restart, we see Kyle Larson running in 10th begin to report an issue with his voltage in the car. And I don't have too much to say on this. I don't know, if it was an alternator or a battery issue with voltage. But running in 10th and how good Larson is at these 2-mile tracks, it's just tough to see, especially as we keep mentioning how, he needs to refocus on NASCAR and put Indy and everything else behind him. And he had that going today, but, it's just tough to see him have to deal with this for the rest of the race.
Yeah, for sure. And, you mentioned that it could possibly be an alternator or a battery. It's just a simple electrical problem, and it's out of his control. It's just one of those, you say luck, even though it still is his car chief, his race engineer's responsibility to make sure that these things are working and that they will make it through the race. But it really sucks to see this happen for him. And with about 60 laps to go, he's running well and might not have had a chance to win the race, but was definitely there competing for top 10 at this point. And, with Larson, as good as he is, probably could have been looking at maybe a top 5 or even a top 3 at the end of the day. But just after that, we're going to see Reddick and Hamlin side by side for third. And Reddick is going to take the spot in turn 2, but no later than that. Todd Gilliland is going to blow a left rear in turn 2 from 17th, and he's going to back into the wall super hard. Kind of similar to the Bowman hit, but just going in back first instead of front first.
Yeah, it was a very interesting wreck, but I'm not surprised to see the left rear blowout. That's kind of a wreck we see quite often here with the next-gen car. Even going back, I think, 2023, we see Kyle Busch and Chase Elliott, I believe, do the exact same thing. So I'm surprised, again, it took us this long to get a blown tire single car wreck, but that'd be very hard contact for Todd Gilliland, who was having a great day and a points day that he needed. Unfortunately, that would ruin it. But just want to mention here in the pit stops, as we don't mention these too often, we only have 50 laps to go. We see Zane Smith opt for a 2-tire change and emerge as the leader. So, like I keep saying, it's go time for these guys who are way outside the bubble and need a win. And we see Michael McDowell do the same thing with 2-tire strategies. So these guys know it. To be realistically pointing their way in with how far back these guys are, it's not going to happen. But I absolutely love these 2-tire calls to go maybe have a chance to win this race.
Yeah, I do want to backtrack real quick and go back to the Gilliland crash. I had one more point that I wanted to make. I don't mean to backtrack, but I did kind of say earlier that these cars are not crunching after the Alex Bowman hit, and that's kind of what you expect a NASCAR to do, as it's these things aren't made out of steel on the outside. It's just the roll cage and the roll bars are what keep the car together. So to see this car actually crumble, almost looking like a Gen 6 car or an Xfinity car, I think that's a lot better, and it did lessen the blow for Gilliland, as he had, Bowman had walking issues going into Mexico City, but Gilliland was completely fine. Walks out of the car, heads to Mexico City, and drives a race with no problems. So to see him completely fine, this is another big win for NASCAR on their safety standards.
Yeah. Moving on from – go ahead, Zach.
No, I was going to talk about, so going back to the pit stops, we talked about it in Charlotte a lot, executing on pit road, but we see Tyler Reddick, who was running pretty good, most of the race. He faced a setback in pit row where he stopped too deep in his pit stall, forcing him to back up. So he lost a few spots there. And, for a guy who seems like he's safe right now for the playoffs, because he's run so well all year, it can't hurt to get a win here. You never know what's going to come, with these last races at the end of the season. So you kind of feel for a guy, because out of the blue, you never know, he might not be in the playoffs, if something crazy happens at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, and I even forgot. Yeah, they're in the playoff bubble, but they don't have a win. But all 3 of the 23 XI cars, except Riley Herbst, is way outside the playoff bubble. But Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick, you usually see those guys. Usually see Reddick get a win or 2, and Bubba Wallace be able to point his way in or get a win, late in the season. But these guys are nowhere near safe with how these races are going, and there being only 8 races left in the season with Pocono. So just a good points there to clear that up for everyone. But, getting back into the racing, we see Zane Smith and Hocevar, two guys who don't have a win yet. Like I want to mention again, and Larson just buying Hocevar is going to give him a big push into 1 and 2 to help him, edge over Zane Smith here with just about 50 laps to go.
Yeah, and Kyle Larson is then going to just dive right under him, basically, right after, helping push Hocevar ahead. And however, Larson's going to get loose in turn 4, and in turn 4, he's going to slide up the racetrack, and Hocevar is going to be able to get back to the gas exit turn 4, and he's going to be defined as our leader with about 45 laps to go. And Larson, after getting loose, is going to get passed by Byron for 2nd, and Zane Smith is going to challenge Buescher for 4th, as Buescher is someone that's been running up front all day. Zach, I know he's your guy, and you might have a little bit to say on this, but this is a huge run for this RFK team.
Yeah, huge run for him. We saw him win stage 1. Kind of looking at the post-race interviews, he struggled a little bit in stage 2 just because he took a little extra fuel in one of his pit stops back there, which, is a smart move. He saw he had one of the fastest cars. He knew going into this race, after qualifying and after stage 1, he had the confidence that he can go in there and win this. And a guy that's right now is the last guy in for the playoffs. Realistically, he needs a win. You don't feel good in the 17 car if you don't have a win going into the last 2 races. Just like Luke said, anything can happen, as we've seen so far in this season. So someone who just honestly these last 45 laps, he's got to be perfect. You got to go out there, you got to execute. Your pit crew's executed all day. Now you got to go out, you got to go win a race here.
Yeah, and you mentioned him on that 16th position for the playoffs, and on that, not in the bubble, but he's just in by I think 2 or 3 points. And look at him last year, with not being able to get into the playoffs, and having that win at Darlington taken away from Tyler Reddick, getting that win in Watkins Glen during the playoffs. But Chris Buescher is the last person that wants to have to deal with these points battles after last year. And I think him getting a win for this RFK team, who needs it so bad right now to get some momentum and get at least one car into the playoffs, it would be absolutely huge. So just exactly like you said, being perfect for these last 45 laps is what he has to do to gain some just confidence and momentum for this RFK team, like I said, who just needs it most.
Yeah, and you mentioned needing it most. Well, here comes another name we haven't heard all race after starting 8th, and it's Ty Gibbs. He's up here passing Zane Smith. He just passed Chris Buescher for 5th, and he's here passing Zane Smith for 4th. So you're probably wondering, where's he coming from? He's just going pedal to the metal, and how is he passing these cars so quickly? Well, the leaders, with about 25 laps to go here, they're starting to save fuel. We see our leaders, Hocevar, he doesn't know if he can make it. Byron's running 2nd. He doesn't know if he can make it. Hamlin is running 5th. He's going to be close. So to see Gibbs kind of going pedal to the metal, he might push the issue here and see if he can get up with the leaders with about 20 laps to go.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on Ty Gibbs a little bit more. And I know a lot of people like to bash on Ty Gibbs and kind of make fun of him, and seeing everything on social media. But we talk about Bowman, being out of that 48 car. Well, I understand Ty Gibbs is the grandson of Joe Gibbs, but I think he's like 25th in points right now in a JGR car. We seriously got to look at Ty Gibbs, maybe, in the future, not driving for them anymore, because you just can't be doing that in a 5-star car like the 54 team has. And he has, one of the top pit crews, and he has everything going. He's just not putting together good finishes. So a win here, again, like I mentioned from Buescher, would give him a lot of confidence, momentum going into the fall.
Yeah, and a couple laps before, Gibbs overtakes Smith. Hocevar got a message from his crew chief that he was 4 laps short on fuel. So like Maxie mentioned, he's got to save on fuel or he's not going to make it to the end of this race. And, kind of moving along like 25, 30 laps left, Denny Hamlin, who's running in 5th, his crew chief informs him that the top 4 drivers, they may not be able to make it. So, a guy like Denny, running, with the kid on the way, running for this race, he kind of informed that, he has enough fuel to make it. So all he's got to do is just keep executing and hope these top 4 guys run out of fuel and he has a clear path to the lead.
Yeah, you mentioned Hocevar 4 laps short on fuel, but unfortunately, that's not going to matter as we see about 5 laps later. He's going to have a tire go down, and fuel isn't going to be his demise. You got to hate it for the kid. You know, Zach, you said it 2 or 3 times. Home race, you're like, this kid's finally going to win. He's going to be able to save fuel. He's going to win a race. And he just falls just short again. I don't even have anything to say. It's just so heartbreaking for Hocevar.
Yeah, and I don't really have much else to say either, other than you got to take the positives and move on. You're so close to a win, and I know it's tough as a young driver who needs to get into the playoffs and to prove himself. But running in the top 10 all day and just out of your control, just experiencing these setbacks. But as soon as I heard that Hamlin had enough fuel to make it, and all 4 guys in front of him didn't, I knew it was over. We see Michael McDowell pit for fuel from 18th. And William Byron, Denny Hamlin would battle. But Hamlin just had enough fuel to run it as hard as he can. And, with William Byron not knowing if he could make it, he wasn't going to, run that hard as he's already locked in the playoffs. But with that being said, Denny Hamlin crosses the line over a second lead over Buescher to get his win. I love Hamlin, but I would love to see Chris Buescher get this win and put that RFK car in the playoffs, like I mentioned earlier, and just get a little bit of momentum back in this Ford team.
Yeah, being a Buescher fan, it hurt a little bit. Great to see him have a fast race car run second, but like I said, he needed to be perfect, and he wasn't. I feel like it wasn't touched on enough. And someone as a Buescher fan, obviously, I'm gonna put emphasis on this. But with about 20 laps to go in the race, Buescher was running in front of Zane Smith and Denny Hamlin, and he got loose. He shot up the racetrack a little bit, and that allowed Zane Smith, Denny, to overtake him. So, and Buescher talked about this in his post-game interview on Prime, and a post-game interview that was posted later on. That was the reason he lost the race. Being ahead of Denny and how fast his car was all day, I don't have any doubt in my mind that if he didn't get loose there, it was his race to lose. I think if he didn't get loose there, he's locked in the playoff. He's got that win that RFK desperately needs. So definitely frustrating for a guy like that because, he's going to take that, look at that, and, blame that on himself because, his pit crew executed. He had such a fast car. So, just unfortunate for a guy like that.
Yeah, it's exactly what Luke said earlier with Hocevar. You need to take the positives. That's all you can do when something like that happens where you just fall short by just an inch. So Chris Buescher, he's got some good tracks coming up here as we approach the end of the summer. Luke, you mentioned he's a winner at Watkins, so he'll have a shot there as that's going to be coming up in mid-August. So, and Daytona, that's a throw up. We have Atlanta coming up in 2 weeks. Richmond, that's another good track for him. So there's a lot of great opportunities for that 17 team to finally break through and lock themselves into the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. You just took the words right out of my mouth. I have no doubt that this 17 team is going to lock their way into the playoffs, either by a win or they're just going to run consistently in the top 10 and just point their way in, as I don't think we're going to have more than 16 drivers. But, Daytona, Richmond, Watkins Glen, pick your poison. I believe he's going to get a win at one of those because Chris Buescher, as much as he's undershadowed and underrated, and I think he's one of the most underrated drivers in the field. When it's time to go, it's time to go. So there's not much else I have to say, but I have no doubt that he's going to point or win his way in.
Yep, we'd love to see that kid from Prosper, Texas, make it in.
I love it.
For sure, but that takes us straight to the results as we see Buescher second and Hamlin winning the race. But in third, it will be Ty Gibbs. He was able to keep his spot in third, and Bubba Wallace having a 7th run, making it on fuel and finishing 4th. And here's a guy in 5th. I want to mention this. It's Kyle Larson, and this is another run where we saw him in the back. And he yet again moves forward, just like Nashville. I mentioned, I'm like, I don't think he's going to be top, or he'll have trouble being top 10, top 8 after his electrical issue. And here he is, 5th place finish. So no matter what is in that 5 car's way, he just seems to jump that hurdle with relative ease.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we made Carl Larson qualify in the back every single race, I still think he would find his way getting these top 5 finishes and making the playoffs with ease. It doesn't matter where he qualifies, doesn't matter what goes on in the race. He is such a good driver and keeping his composure that, he gets these top 5 finishes. And, we got to look at him that almost, he could have got the win without this electrical problem or this electrical setback. So, I want to keep mentioning him. Always a guy you have to watch out for later in the year.
Yeah, then moving along, we got, Chastain in 6th, Zane Smith in 7th, Kyle Busch 8th, Ryan Preece 9, and Brad Keselowski rounding at the top 10. I want to give a huge shout out to RFK. All their drivers in the top 10, that's huge for them. Giving them confidence going into the back half of the year. You want to see one of those guys, get a win, make it to the playoffs. So I think that's huge for them. I was really happy to see that.
Yeah, you mentioned one car making it from our RFK. Why not more than one? We mentioned Keselowski has had his struggles, but Buescher's so close. Preece has been good. He's right on the playoff bubble. So if Buescher would win or Keselowski would win one of these super speedways and finally piece it together, and all 3 of these cars could be in the playoffs. There's scenarios where I feel like for RFK, if you shake the 8 ball, none of the cars could make it, and all of them could.
Yeah, I love that point. Shaking the 8 ball. I picked Ryan Preece to win this race because simply of just how late it is in the season and needing a win. He is on that playoff bubble, but I think realistically he's going to have to find a way. And I think Daytona is the best shot for any of the RFKs to get their way in, with Brad Keselowski being as good as the super speedways and Ryan Preece, if he doesn't, go flipping into oblivion at Daytona. And Chris Buescher, who was won there 2 years ago at the night race. So I cannot wait to see what happens with this RFK crew. But just going further down the list, like Eric Jones in 11th, another good finish. Tyler Redkin 13th. He's doing what he has to do to keep that playoff hopes alive. And Daniel Suarez in 14th. So a solid finish for him going into his home track in Mexico City here.
Yeah, for sure. And further down the list, we're going to see my pick from Nashville, Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell in 16th, AJ Allmendinger 17th, Shane Van Gisbergen 18th. It's another decent run for him on a 2-mile track that he has never even seen before. So a great run for him there. Austin Dillon 19th, Ricky Stenhouse 20th. So he's able to break the top 20 after a 39th dead last place finish last week after getting wrecked by Hocevar. So it's a solid rebound race for him. Probably not quite what he wanted after being right on the playoff bubble, and he's going to lose more points to the bubble. But it's a solid finish that can be built off of after his incident at Nashville.
Yeah, for sure. Now moving along, we got Justin Haley with 21st, Joey Logano in 22nd, Chase Briscoe 23rd, Ty Dillon 24th, and Riley Herbst in 25th. Like I mentioned before, you kind of got a feel for Chase Briscoe, 3 poles in a row and he's finishing outside the top 20. I don't know if it's just an issue with the car, if it's something with him. But if you got 3 poles in a row, you got to execute, at least one of those.
Yeah. I mean, what happened? I didn't hear anything that was wrong with the car. I mean, 3 poles in a row and nothing to show for it. You got to find your way into victory lane in one of these. I think this is his worst finish when he has a pole. I believe so. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this stuff just can't happen. Simply as that. And, I feel for him, but man, first, and then you finish 23rd. It's really unfortunate, but just rounding out the finishing order. We got William Byron in 28th, who had to pit, unfortunately, closing the race, with Hocevar, flat tire, gets 29th. Leads 32 laps, only gets 17 points to show for it. You got to take the positives, like I keep mentioning, but it's tough. And I feel for the kid. But Ryan Blaney, 32nd, 4 laps down, just couldn't regain from whatever happened on his wreck. And then Alex Bowman, I want to touch on him again. Just super glad that he is okay and back up racing in Mexico City, and he'll be in the car for Pocono as well.
Yeah, I had two quick points that I wanted to make, backtracking on two drivers that you mentioned in your segment just there, and one of them being Briscoe about another bad finish outside the top 20, and it kind of leads me to asking you this question. He's had the speed in qualifying. The car clearly has speed. It's able to run up front. So is an issue happening on pit road, or could this potentially be a discrepancy between Chase Briscoe and his crew chief, James Small, who didn't exactly have a great relationship with the last driver of the car, Martin Truex Jr. either?
Yeah, I'll give my 2 cents. I think it's a driver issue. Whenever he's leading a race or starts on the pole, it almost looks like he's scared to use that speed that he has. You look at Charlotte, I don't even think he led a lap, and then Nashville, who you got overtaken pretty quickly. I don't know if the speed's not transferring through, or they're making adjustments that make the car worse, which could fall on James Smalls or the crew. It seems on pit road he's executing decently well. I think he needs to, I don't know, just put the foot to the floor and run the car that he knows he had in qualifying, because the car has speed. It's shown. But I just wish I had more information as to what's going on with this 19 team.
And I also wanted to mention and touch on the 28th place finisher, which you did, William Byron. He ran out of fuel, but he also had the fastest lap. So if Byron was good on fuel, he would have had to have been one of the favorites to win the race. But, Rudy Fugle, the crew chief, on top of that stand for the 24, just maybe something didn't quite line up. They didn't get fuel in somewhere where they wanted to, or quite as much as they wanted to. So it's just little mistakes like that can completely, take you from being one of the biggest contenders and potentially winning the race to almost an outside the top 30 finish. But that's all I've got for our finishers here at Michigan, unless either of you have anything.
Nope.
No, I mean, I'm just going to go through a few announcements, but if that's it for you guys, then I'll get right into it.
All good here.
All right, guys. So like I mentioned in the Nashville podcast, which we just released, be on the lookout for some exclusive content for Pocono Raceway, as all three of us that are in this podcast are going to be there. So we got exclusive passes to the garage area. So we're going to get to show you guys what goes on behind the scenes before the Cup race. And I know Max is going to the Xfinity race, so maybe he'll get a couple cool pictures or videos of some drivers. So just look out on their Instagram page, Upside Down Thoughts, and the link tree is there as well to see everything that we're on. But yeah, just get ready for Pocono because it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep, definitely.
But last segment here, our picks to win for Mexico City, as we didn't have any questions on the last two podcasts, and I'll let you guys kick it off. If you had a pick to win before we saw the race, go ahead. If Zach, if you didn't, that's all good.
I did have a pick, and being in the future, I feel so biased taking this pick, but my pick to win was the 88 of Shane Van Gisbergen, because it's NASCAR's first time going to this track with this car. Shane being as good as he is at his road courses, and he's going to have an advantage, as he has just as many starts on this track as everyone else in the field does, except Suarez, who does have a few, and he has the Xfinity start and a few NASCAR Mexico starts and international starts as well. But, this is the same situation we see with the 88 that we saw at the first Chicago street race. Absolutely dominated the field, and no one else seemed to stand any chance. So I had to go with the 88 of Shane Van Gisbergen.
Yeah, Max, you took the words right out of my mouth. I know it sounds biased. We already saw it, but how could you not pick the 88 car? So good at road courses, and Max, you mentioned it. He won the first ever race at the Chicago street race. So it's kind of just an obvious pick there.
Yeah, and I could have went the obvious route, like you guys said. I wanted to change it up a little bit. I went with Michael McDowell here, kind of being a road course ringer, and a guy that needs to win his way in. So I was hoping for him, but as we know, SVG does get the win. So Max and I are now tied with one correct pick, as I got with Larson correct in Homestead. So and Zach, we're all tied now, I guess.
Yeah.
So super fun podcast. Hope you guys enjoy, seeing our faces. If you guys like this style, type in the comment below. If you like the audio only style better, let us know. Leave your questions, comments, concerns in the comment section below for or Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio podcast. We'll be sure to answer them in the next podcast. But I want to thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you back with Mexico City.
Have a good one, everyone.
See you guys.